2 days ago, the system now aimed at the Gulf Coast had a 1 in 10 chance of becoming a tropical storm. Today, it is better than 1 in 2, and still climbing. At the same time, 1,000 miles north, forecasters are warning of a violent tornado outbreak with the potential for long-track, life-threatening tornadoes. These are not two separate forecasts. They are one weather pattern doing two things at once, and more than 100 million Americans are in the path. Here is what is about to happen and what you need to do before it does. Today, the middle of the United States is bracing for a tornado outbreak that forecasters saw coming days in advance. The Storm Prediction Center has placed central Illinois and northwest Indiana under a level 4 out of 5 risk, and the language in their outlook is blunt. Intense tornadoes, damaging winds up to 80 miles per hour, hail up to 2.5 inches across. That is the official federal forecast, written before a single storm has formed, and it is the strongest kind of warning the system is built to give. But that outbreak is only half the story, and that is the part almost no one is connecting. The same weather pattern driving these storms in the Midwest is, at this exact moment, trying to build a tropical storm over the Gulf of Mexico. One pattern. Two completely different disasters. Pointed at this country from opposite directions, on the same days. By the time we are done here, you will understand why the storm threatening Illinois today and the storm forming off the coast of Texas are not two separate events. They are two faces of one system, and together they put more than 100 million Americans in the path. Let me start with what is happening today, because that is where the clock is shortest and the danger to life is highest. A powerful low-pressure system is deepening over the northern plains, and it is dragging a piece of the jet stream down across the country with it. That sets the table for a classic, high-end, severe weather day. The ingredients are already in place. What is not yet settled is exactly how they come together this afternoon, and that uncertainty is the entire reason forecasters are uneasy. So let me show you what that level 4 risk actually means, because the word they use for it is one of the most misunderstood terms in weather. The Storm Prediction Center calls today's risk a moderate risk, and that word is misleading if you do not know the scale. Moderate does not mean medium. It is the 4th rung on a 5-rung ladder, and the agency uses it only a handful of times in an entire year. When they reach for it, they are telling you to expect not a few isolated strong storms, but widespread, long-lived, dangerous ones over a broad area. There is only one level above it, reserved for the very worst outbreaks on record. So a moderate risk, issued more than a day ahead, is a loud, deliberate alarm from the most careful forecasters in the country. Underneath that headline risk, they draw separate maps for each hazard, and the detail there is what matters. For tornadoes today, they have drawn a 15% area, and over part of it, they have added what is called a hatch. That hatching is the quiet part of the forecast that says the loudest thing. It means the environment can produce significant tornadoes, the strong and violent ones, rated EF2 and higher, with real potential for an EF3 or worse. The National Weather Service office in Chicago went further in its own discussion, warning of long-tracked, strong to violent tornadoes, especially south of Interstate 80. Those words matter, so let me translate them. A long-track tornado is one that does not lift after a mile. It stays on the ground and grinds across the countryside for tens of miles through whatever is in its path. An EF3 tornado throws cars, strips roofs off well-built homes, and turns debris into projectiles moving at highway speed. This is not the brief, ropey spin-up that vanishes in a field. This is the kind that levels what it hits. And the forecasters are telling us, hours in advance, that today's atmosphere can make them. The threat does not stop at tornadoes. The same outlook carries a 30% hatched area for damaging winds, which signals gusts of 75 miles per hour or greater. That is hurricane force, produced by ordinary thunderstorms. The hail threat is hatched as well, for stones larger than 2 inches. So this is a stacked all-hazards day, where the same storms could be dropping giant hail, throwing hurricane-force gusts, and putting violent tornadoes on the ground, sometimes all at once, across a populated stretch of the Midwest. And the reason all of this is possible traces back to one thing: a storm system that does not belong in the middle of June. The low-pressure system behind today's outbreak is, frankly, out of season. If you handed a meteorologist these numbers with the date removed, almost every one of them would call it a spring system, an early April, tornado season system. Then you would tell them it is the middle of June, a week before summer officially begins, and watch their expression change. That mismatch is the engine of today's threat. Here is what makes it so unusual. The upper-level pattern over the region is forecast to run 3 to 4 standard deviations below normal for mid-June. In plain terms, that is the far edge of what this time of year has ever produced. Forecasters in Chicago have pointed out that the surface low could threaten the all-time record for the lowest pressure ever measured in that region during the month of June. Not a daily record. The all-time monthly record. The strength of a storm is written in how low its pressure drops, and this one is reaching for a number June has essentially never seen. That strength is what supplies the violence. Overhead, the jet stream, which in summer is normally weak and pushed far to the north, has been hauled down across the Midwest and cranked up to between 60 and 80 knots. That is roughly 70 to 90 miles per hour of wind screaming through the upper atmosphere. In June, when it should be a fraction of that. Below it, a low-level jet is forecast to roar at 50 to 60 knots, acting as a conveyor belt that pulls warm, soaking, unstable air north from the Gulf. When you stack those two wind streams and point them across each other, you put a spin into the atmosphere, and that turning is what teaches a thunderstorm to rotate. A rotating storm is a tornado machine. The turning of that wind is the part that matters most. It is not enough for the wind to be strong. It has to change direction and speed as you climb. And today, it does exactly that. Near the ground, the wind carries warm air up from the south. A few thousand feet up, that conveyor belt roars in from the southwest. Miles higher, the jet screams almost due west. When the wind turns and accelerates through those layers, it threads a corkscrew into the air, and a thunderstorm growing up through that corkscrew does not just rise, it begins to spin. That rotation is the seed of every significant tornado. All of it is going to focus along the warm front, the boundary, where warm air is overtaking cooler air, because that seam is where the atmosphere concentrates its lowest level spin. That is the rail the worst storms will ride today, and it is why forecasters are watching its exact position hour by hour. Add the fuel. Ahead of the system, dew points are climbing into the upper 60s and near 70 degrees, and the instability, the raw energy these storms feed on, is forecast to reach between 2,500 and 3,500 units on the scale forecasters use. Those are big numbers, the kind that let a storm explode upward and stay violent for hours. Everything is in place. But there is still one question this loaded setup cannot answer until this morning, and it is the question that decides whether today becomes a tornado day or a wind disaster. The atmosphere has already decided how much energy it will bring today. What it has not decided is which weapon it will use. That single unknown is called storm mode, and it is the knife's edge this entire forecast balances on. It works like this. When the air is loaded the way it is today, the storms can organize in one of two ways. They can stay separate as individual rotating supercells, each one its own engine with clean air to feed on. A supercell riding the warm front in this environment is the most efficient tornado producer the atmosphere builds, and that is the scenario that delivers the strong, long-track tornadoes. Or the storms can merge into one long line, a wall of wind and rain that races forward and, if it gets strong enough, becomes a derecho, a swath of straight-line destruction hundreds of miles long. Same loaded atmosphere. Two very different ways for it to come apart. Forecasters measure how prime this kind of day is, with a tool that blends all the ingredients into a single score. Across most of the country on most days, that number sits near 0. Today, the guidance is painting values of 6, 8, and locally 10 across parts of Missouri and Illinois. Those are the numbers that show up on the worst days in the record, the ones studied for years afterward. When that score climbs that high and the storms stay discrete, the ceiling on the event is extreme. The reason no one can tell you the outcome yet is that the deciding factors resolve only at the last minute. It comes down to the exact position of the warm front, how much the air heats up before storms fire, and whether an early morning round of storms either disrupts the atmosphere or sharpens it. Those are not the big features that models lock down days ahead. They reveal themselves this morning, after most people have already gone to bed last night with their guard down. So the honest message is this: do not wait to find out which version shows up. Prepare for the worst one, because by the time the atmosphere chooses, you will have minutes, not hours. And the next thing to understand is where and when this is most likely to come together. Let me put a clock and a map on today, because danger you cannot locate is just anxiety. Today's threat unfolds in stages. It actually began last night, with a lower-end round of storms across parts of the Midwest and Great Lakes that served as a warm-up act. This morning, a complex of storms is expected across eastern Iowa into Illinois, and how it behaves is the great wild card, because it could either stabilize the air or clear out and let the sun reload the atmosphere into something even more explosive by afternoon. The dangerous window is this afternoon into tonight, roughly from the middle of the afternoon through the late evening. That is when the atmosphere is expected to be most unstable and most primed, and when discrete cells, if they form, would be most likely to turn into tornado-producing supercells. The corridor of greatest concern runs across northern Illinois, including a city like Rockford, reaching toward the southern edge of the Chicago metro, and then east into Indiana toward Indianapolis. That is millions of people sitting in or near the area where the most dangerous storms are expected to track during the evening hours. The evening timing is its own danger. As the sun goes down, tornadoes get harder to see, families settle in for the night, and the warnings that do come reach fewer people. A nighttime tornado is far deadlier than a daytime one, not because it is stronger, but because people cannot react to what they cannot see and are not awake to hear. The defense is simple. Have more than one way to get a warning that can wake you up tonight: a weather radio or an emergency alert on a phone that is not silenced. Know where your safe room is before the watch becomes a warning. And if you live in a mobile or manufactured home, have a plan to be somewhere sturdier, because those homes account for a large share of tornado deaths and cannot stand up to this kind of wind. That is the northern half of this system, the sharpest edge, the part with the least time on the clock. But while every camera and every weather app is pointed at the Midwest today, something is happening about 1,000 miles to the south that almost no one is watching with the same intensity. And it is being driven by the very same pattern. Off the coast of Texas, in the warm water of the northwestern Gulf, a storm is trying to organize, and it is doing it fast. The National Hurricane Center is tracking a broad area of showers and thunderstorms there, and the numbers tell the story. Just 2 days ago, this system had only a 10% chance of developing into a tropical storm. As of now, that number has climbed to 60%, and if it pulls itself together, the next name on the list this season is Arthur. Here is the part to understand. Whether or not it earns that name almost does not matter. The impacts are coming either way. The National Weather Service in Houston has already used the phrase life-threatening flooding in its forecast, and that is not a word they use lightly. They are warning of an additional 4 to 10 inches of rain, with rates that have at times exceeded 2 to 5 inches in an hour. The atmosphere over southeast Texas is holding a near record amount of moisture for the middle of June, and the totals across the multi-day event could reach a foot of rain in the hardest hit areas from the Texas coast across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. The speed of this is its own warning. Tropical systems that organize slowly, far out at sea, give everyone days to prepare. The ones that come together fast, right against the coast, are the ones that catch people off guard, because the gap between not worrying about it and being underwater can be a matter of hours. That is exactly the setup here. And the danger is less about wind than about water that does not leave. The deadliest floods do not come from the strongest storms. They come from the slowest ones, the systems that stall over the same ground and keep raining until the water has nowhere left to go. Much of this region is already saturated from earlier rounds of rain, so the ground cannot absorb much more, and almost all of it runs straight into the creeks and rivers. A foot of rain on already soaked ground is not an inconvenience. It is the kind of event that puts water into homes that have never flooded before. And this system may do something tropical storms are not supposed to do. Several forecast models suggest it could hold together, and a few even strengthen it as it moves inland over the deep south later this week. By the textbook, that should be impossible. because a tropical system runs on warm ocean water and is supposed to die once it moves over land. The explanation is the thread that ties this entire video together. High above that storm, the same jet stream driving the tornado outbreak in the Midwest is passing over the top of it, pulling air up and out and letting the system breathe. It is being fed from above by the same machinery winding up the storms in the north. That is not a coincidence of the calendar. That is one pattern running both plays at once. Step back, and the whole thing resolves into a single shape. The tornado outbreak in the Midwest and the tropical system in the Gulf are not two stories that happen to share a week. They are two arms of one locked, amplified jet stream pattern, and that single pattern is capable of throwing opposite extremes at the country at the same time. Normally, the jet stream is a smooth, fast river of air that keeps weather moving along. But sometimes it buckles into enormous peaks and troughs and then gets stuck. Where it plunges south, it carves out a zone of cold air aloft, low pressure, and storms. That is the trough driving today's outbreak. Where it bulges north, it builds a dome of warm, sinking air, heat, and drought. The trough and the ridge are two sides of the same wave. You cannot have one without the other. And that is exactly what we are seeing. Because while the Midwest braces for tornadoes and the Gulf braces for floods, the western United States is baking under a heat warning near 110 degrees, with 20 red flag warnings posted for critical fire weather. One wave, three faces. Tornadoes, floods, and fire all at once. This is the reason I keep insisting it is one system and not three separate forecasts. When the atmosphere locks into a pattern like this, it does not hand you a single hazard. It serves a menu of them in different regions, all from the same source. And because they look so different from one another, we file them as unrelated events and miss how much of the country is under the gun at once. The family in Indiana watching for a tornado tonight and the family in Louisiana watching the water rise are inside the same machine. And that machine is not finished. It is about to start moving. The pattern does not stay frozen. By tomorrow, the system begins to break down and shift east. And as it does, the two halves start reaching for each other. The severe weather threat slides off the plains and into the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, where the Storm Prediction Center has already drawn a risk for tomorrow. At the same time, the tropical moisture from the Gulf gets flung northeast across the southeast and toward the Carolinas, where rainfall totals that were not on the radar a day ago are now climbing. The two threats that started 1,000 miles apart begin to merge over the eastern part of the country, and when they do, the illusion that they were ever separate falls apart. Before we close, one thing needs to be addressed, because a week this dramatic always brings it out. Some will claim storms this large and this coordinated must be engineered or steered by technology. The physics says otherwise, plainly. A single storm system carries energy on the order of a quadrillion joules and far beyond. The transmitter arrays, usually blamed, operate at a few megawatts. The gap between those numbers is so enormous that no technology can create or steer weather at this scale. This is the jet stream, a warm Gulf and an out-of-season storm, fully explained by ordinary physics. The system is not hiding the danger. Forecasters are doing the opposite, escalating their warnings in public, in real time, days ahead. So here is what to do with the next few days. If you are in the Midwest, have your tornado plan ready before this afternoon, and do not assume the evening quiet means the threat has passed, because the dangerous window runs late. If you are along the Gulf or across the Deep South, respect the water more than the wind, because the rate and duration of this rain are what threaten lives, and a storm does not need a name to drown a street. If you are in the East, know the same pattern is headed your way tomorrow. Watch the pattern, not just the sky over your own house. We will be tracking all of it as it develops, because the next 72 hours are going to test a very large part of this country, and the people who understand it as one system instead of three forecasts are the ones who will see it.